Hello, my sweet little goblins. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jay, and guys, today I am talking about all the books that I read in August, which includes any DNFs that I might have. And I didn't have too many, thankfully. Sometimes I get in those moods where I just like cycle through books and like only get like 10 pages in and I'm like, I can't do this. But August was actually a really good reading month. I surprised myself with how much I actually got to read. Yeah, I don't know. I really pushed through some good books, and when I was looking through my Goodreads account, I realized that most of them, if not, well, most of them were 5-star reads. So let's just get into it. If any of you have followed my vlogs, then you'll probably recognize a lot of these books. Most of my in-depth reviewing is going to be on my vlogs. So definitely check those out if you want a more expanded sort of reaction to any of these books. But I'm gonna start with the book that I actually finished at the very end of August, and it is probably hands down one of my top 3 books this year. And that book is going to be Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Sorry for the glare. There you go. Now you can see it. Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller was, God, it was so good, y'all. Like, there is just no words. Actually, I have a lot of words as to how it's good. I actually have her other book, Circe, but I heard from a few people that it's kind of hit or miss, like not a lot happens, that sort of thing. So it's been sitting on my shelf for a really long time, and I actually started Song of Achilles because I was having trouble sleeping one night and I just needed something sort of soothing to put on as an audiobook, and I ended up choosing Song of Achilles, and it did the opposite of put me to sleep. I was like up at like 3 a.m. riveted by what was happening. Y'all, this is a 5 out of 5-star read for me. Song of Achilles was just absolutely everything that I could have ever wanted from a Homeric epic retelling. I've probably mentioned this before. If you follow me on Instagram or just even watch my YouTube videos in general, you'll know that I spent a lot of time with the ancient Roman and Greek languages and history. I had originally planned on becoming a professor in it. I studied it all throughout high school and all throughout college and had planned to go through grad school with it, but that just didn't work out. I just decided to pivot, basically. But I still have a very profound, deep-seated love for all of classical antiquity. And specifically the Homeric epics, so the Iliad and the Odyssey. Those are my favorite stories of all time. I will never get tired of watching any sort of movie, reading any sort of book, do anything to do with the Iliad and the Odyssey. And Song of Achilles was just something that the moment I started reading it or listening to it on audiobook, I knew that Madeline Miller, the author, knew her stuff. And I was pleased to find out that she actually was a Latin teacher, a Latin and Greek teacher for about 10 years while she wrote Song of Achilles, which is actually her debut novel, at least I think in fiction. I could be wrong. Maybe it's not. Yeah, I'll look that up later. But this just was mind-blowing for a couple of reasons. I'll put this down because it's very shiny and distracting. But Song of Achilles, like I said, you could tell from the moments that the book starts that Madeline Miller really knows her stuff about classical history, and she finds a way to explain like the cultures and the isms of that time without being stuffy or dry, and while weaving this incredibly beautiful tale about Achilles and Patroclus. And historically, it's always been rumored that Achilles and Patroclus were lovers, and so this book is basically about their like love story. And I put that in quotations because you won't find their love story in any like real like intense deep context in any sort of actual primary sources in history. At least I don't think so. I think it's more of just a mention and a side, a speculation in history, if you will. But anyway, the book in general is so beautiful. It is so lyrical, and the way she sort of like takes the reader through their lifetime together up until like the Trojan War and throughout the Trojan War is just so exhilarating. It's beautiful, and it's also action-packed, and you never really feel bored, and there are all sorts of moving pieces when it comes to the different kings of Greece and the surrounding areas, and there's a lot of like moving political factions that she somehow manages to sort of explain or allude to that wasn't boring. None of it was boring, and it was so beautiful. I could go on and on about this book, and I'm not going to. I just implore you to read it if you have not. I read a lot of horror, I read a lot of fantasy, and this one, from the very beginning to the very end, where I shed a lot of tears, had my heart, and I highly recommend it. The next book that I finished and read in August is going to be The Deep by Nick Cutter. Now, I did dedicate an entire vlog to this. It may or may not be out by the time this comes out. It's a bit of an involved vlog just because, I don't know, I had a lot of feelings. So let me just preface this with that this is a 5 out of 5 star read for me. Nick Cutter, from when I read The Troop, which was my introduction to Nick Cutter, I knew that I was going to have a very long and special relationship with this author. When I read The Troop, it was terrifying. It got under my skin in so many different ways, and The Deep, I thought I would be able to handle it more since I was already sort of like accustomed to Nick Cutter's craziness. No. Absolutely not. Turns out no. This is more intense. It is claustrophobic. It is cerebral. It is basically like if you mixed The Shining with The Abyss with a little bit of Stephen King's It, and it just is like the perfect concoction of horror. I don't know how to explain to you the amount of anxiety I had reading this, but I live for that. That, as a horror book fan, I can only dream of multiple books in my life that I read that make me feel the way this made me feel. I don't know if that made any sense. That was a lot of jumble of words, but basically this made me feel a lot of things. I had to take multiple breaks from reading it because it was just anxiety inducing. My blood was pumping the whole time. Sometimes it felt like as I was reading it, I could feel the sort of walls around me tighten because they were tightening in the book. So if you're not familiar with this book, this is basically about a man who goes down to help his brother find a cure for this disease called the Gets, where everyone forgets how to do really important things like breathing and I don't know, living in general. So he is called down to the very depths of the bottom of the Pacific Ocean to help his mad scientist type brother figure out if they can find a cure via this like weird living substance called ambrosia, but what they find underneath the ocean is just absolute terror. And as someone who is not a strong swimmer, who has a very deep respect for the ocean because I would die immediately if I was in this situation, yeah, I highly recommend this book if you really want to be stressed out, because I was stressed out and I also enjoyed every second of being stressed out. Like, it's just so evocative. Like, there are so many things you will feel that you didn't realize you could feel by reading this book, or any book really. I will say just a couple of trigger warnings. There is one specific mention of sexual assault. There might be two, but it's very brief. And then there is also animal abuse. I'm not gonna say it's widespread because it's not, but there are moments where it's kind of intense. So if you're particularly sensitive to that, I would say that maybe Nick Cutter is not for you. He's not afraid to push the boundaries of what is acceptable, I guess. I'm pretty sensitive to animal abuse, but I sort of like, I don't know, black out when I read those moments and just like rush past it. So just fair warning, but still 5 out of 5 stars for me. Okay, the next book that I read in August surprised the pants off of me, honestly. And I don't mean that in like a I expected it to be bad kind of way, but it just, again, like The Deep, made me feel things that I didn't think I was going to be feeling while I read this book. And it is Starving Ghosts in Every Thread by Eric LaRocca. Now, this is a thin book. I think technically you could call it a novella. This was sent to me late last year by the author as, you know, in exchange for an honest review, and it was around the time that I was starting to feel burnt out, but I accepted it anyway because that's what toxic hustle culture makes you think you need to do. And then I took my long break from YouTube and it just sat and it sat. Well, I finally read it, and I did post my full review on Instagram and on Goodreads, but this is a 5 out of 5 star read for me, honestly. It is something truly special when an author can just make you feel so many things in less than 100 pages. So what this book is about, we follow the main character named Teddy. She is in this small northeastern town, and she is so consumed with guilt that her body literally unravels unless she feeds on the emotions of other people. So it's sort of hard to explain unless you go ahead and read it, but it is very literal in the sense that she is actually feeding on other people's emotions, and she is actually unraveling. Like, it sort of explains that her, like, the unraveling of her body is kind of like strings or threads, and it starts like at her wrists. It's a lot to go into, and it's better if you just go ahead and read it. I will also make a disclaimer that this book is out of print for right now. They are actually reprinting it rather, either late this year or early 2022, and it's going to be hardcovered and illustrated edition. At least that's what Eric LaRocca told me. So I figured I'd go ahead and tell you, because you're gonna have a hard time finding it unless it's on like a secondhand used bookstore or someone's willing to give it up. I'm not going to give mine up, no, and I'm going to get the illustrated version 100%. What was really striking to me about this book is that Eric LaRocca managed to give this sort of slow burn vibe in less than 100 pages, and it was really interesting because even though things developed fast, I felt like I was very connected to the character. I felt like I was very connected to her motives and to her emotions and, you know, what was happening around her, and it sort of added to that slow burn vibe. And then when things sort of popped off at the end, I was like, what? I wasn't ready. I thought we were just building and building, and we were, but then it just like the other shoe dropped and I was not ready, but it was really exciting and fantastic to read. This book is very lyrical, it's very tragic, and it just has a way of hitting you right in the heart sometimes. And there is an underlying sort of current where it talks about, you know, what happens when you tether yourself to other people's expectations and all the small little things in life that can suffocate us if we let it. And I think that it's a very important theme that we should all talk about or think about. And there are parts too where I think that there was some solid guilt over the main character's sexuality, and I think that was really important and really interesting to read. And it's so very subtle, and at some points not so subtle, but it is so skillfully done, and I really enjoyed this. And I read it, you know, in an afternoon, and it was fantastic, so I highly recommend it. The next book that I finished in August is going to be Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Y'all, this sat on my shelf for like a year, and everyone told me over and over again that this was a fantastic read. And did I listen? No. I let it sit on my bookcase for so long. Well, this is a 5 out of 5 star read for me. Everything about this book was so good. Like the atmosphere, the pacing, the character development. Can I just say, the main character of this book, I really didn't like her at the beginning. And then at the end, I was like, yeah, you're a badass bitch, basically. Like she just made it through so much. And then by the end, I was like, I'm ready to be best friends. We are going to go on more adventures together, and I just need to know more about you type of vibe. So the thing about this book that I really loved, everyone said that it was more of a slow burn. I didn't think it was slow burn. I thought it was pretty evenly paced. I thought that the world building, even though it's set in sort of like 1950s Mexico, the world building around that and the setting and the eerie sort of atmosphere, I thought was very, very perfect. And the characters around the main character were very interesting. And it's sort of like a whodunit feeling, where you sort of are just guessing constantly, like who is the villain, who's going to be on the main character's side. And the main character is a smart girl. She really puts together all the pieces in such a fast way that I was like, I don't know that I would be this fortunate to be this smart in this situation, because things were happening that made absolutely zero sense, and she would be confused, and then she would work it out, and then another thing would happen and it would just repeat. And I would be beat down in this situation if I had to constantly go through that. And let me tell you, the twist at the end, so good, so creepy, so weird, so gross, but I really loved it. 5 out of 5 stars to Mexican Gothic. The last book before we move on to DNFs and audiobooks that I finished is going to be Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. Now, I'm not going to get too into this because I had a rather extensive vlog when I decided to read this over House of Leaves, but this is basically like a violent, operatic Southern moment. It's basically about these two men who are from very different backgrounds. They've both been incarcerated, but one is black and one is white, and they both have sons that married each other, and their sons died in a very violent death that makes it seem like it's a hate crime, or is it? So this book is basically about the two men working together to avenge their two sons. And this book was very poignant. It did get sad at some points. The grief was very raw and real. And I was surprised at how much I liked this. This is a 5 out of 5 star read for me. And this is probably my first crime thriller that I've ever read. And I felt like this was a fantastic introduction to this subgenre of thriller. I really loved sort of seeing the dynamic unfold between the two main characters and how they would have moments where they would reminisce on sometimes how not well they treated their gay sons. They couldn't accept all the time, or perhaps barely any of the time that their sons were alive, that they were gay, and that them rehashing that and sort of reliving those moments, feeling that guilt, feeling that sadness, added a very intense emotional layer to reading this book, and I really appreciated it. And it had a lot of Southern flavor to it. I think the author is also from the South, and I think he brought a lot of his own experiences to this book. He has another book, so I'm interested to read that as well, but I really enjoyed it. It was fast-paced, the characters were endearing, the violence was good, and I don't know, I really enjoyed it. So 5 out of 5 stars, highly recommend this one. Okay, in terms of audiobooks, so I only really finished one audiobook. It was The Death of Mrs. Westaway by Ruth Ware. Now, this book follows the main character. Her name is Hal, and she's in a bit of a tight financial spot. She basically finds out that she might be an inheritor of this big fortune, but she feels like it came to the wrong address. But since she's doing so badly financially, she decides to go ahead and visit the family well, visit the family and then, you know, go to the funeral of the family member that died and possibly gain this huge inheritance that will sort of lift her out of poverty. So Hal goes to visit the family estate and attends the funeral of the deceased Mrs. Westaway, and she finds out that things are not exactly what she expected them to be. There are lots of dark family secrets. There's a big sort of gothic atmosphere to this book, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you now that this was a 4 out of 5 star book for me. I think that it might have been higher if maybe, I think it was based on my mood. So I basically spent every morning listening to this audiobook when I went on my 30-40 minute walk. Well, this is like a 12-hour sort of read/listening situation, and you can imagine that took me forever to get through if I was just listening to like 30 minutes at a time here or there. So I think I just dragged it on a little bit, but overall I really enjoyed the gothic atmosphere. I enjoyed sort of like trying to figure out who exactly was committing the sort of who was the villain, I guess I should say. It definitely gave like sort of you know that board game Clue, and they made like a movie out of it, sort of like that vibe, except it wasn't funny, it was serious, because it was, you know, it was all about this big house and the inheritance and then the quirky family members surrounding all of this, and it was very interesting to get to know each and every one of those family members and what their motives might be, why they are probably innocent, why they're probably not innocent, and then the twist at the end, I'm not going to say was predictable. I think it was surprising enough, but I think by the time I had finally gotten to the end, I predicted it because I had spent basically 3 weeks listening to this audiobook, so I was like, I think it's this person, and I was right to a point, but there was like a secondary twist that I wasn't exactly prepared for, and I very much enjoyed that. So overall, I'm definitely going to read more Ruth Ware books. I definitely like how she stacks the twists, how she does some heavy character development, and really builds like the anticipation throughout the book. I definitely can appreciate that entirely, and that was my first real foray into thriller, the thriller genre, so I'm really excited to read more Ruth Ware. All right, since we are on the topic of audiobooks, I'm just going to go ahead and get into my DNFs. So the audiobook that I DNF'd was The Ruins by Scott Smith. So when I say DNF, I don't necessarily mean that the book was unreadable. Sometimes I do. Sometimes that's very much the case, like House of Leaves, which I should mention I also DNF'd, but we're not going to get into House of Leaves. We're talking about The Ruins by Scott Smith now. I probably got a third way into the book and it was just a bit slow for me. If you don't know what The Ruins is about, it's basically about a group of young people who go on a vacation to Mexico, and they find themselves like on their way to explore these old set of ruins, and it's kind of off the beaten path, and they run into some very intense, weird trouble while they get there, when they get there, sorry. But there is a movie adaptation of it. It is very popular. If you've never seen it, I'll float the sort of movie poster here. But I love the movie. I love the movie a lot. I watch it at least like once every year. It is one of my favorite movies, and I think this is sort of one of those moments where I should have read the book first and then seen the movie afterwards, but I didn't even know it was a book when the movie came out. The book is a little slower, it's a little more literary, and it's a little more character intensive, which is a good thing. But I just found myself listening to the audiobook and not caring about the excessive backstory that Scott Smith would sometimes go into while trying to talk about everything else that was happening in the book. There are just moments where I was like, okay, I really don't care why this one character has a weird relationship with their parent or whatever it was. So I DNF'd it. I might come back to it. It wasn't bad. If I had to rate it on what I'd already read, I'd probably be at a 3.5. Not an unfortunate read in any sort of way, but just a bit slower for the mood that I was in. So that's really it in terms of the audiobooks. My last DNF that I hate to even like put up here as a DNF is going to be The Caro Haunt by Darcy Coates. Now, I do believe that I will come back to this book. I say that all the time about my DNFs, and it's a toxic trait of mine, but I almost never come back to books that I just put down and DNF. This book is about a young woman who is a tour guide of this famously haunted house, and she gets an opportunity to do an extensive like week-long study of the house with this group, and it's financed by some like young wealthy man. I got to page 173, so I was like well halfway into the book. It wasn't catching me because I don't find it very scary. The writing felt a lot like adult Goosebumps, where it was sort of just like putting down what was scary and then moving on to the next thing. It just like didn't feel very, I don't know, I didn't feel the scares in my bones, if you know what I mean. I will say that Darcy Coates does very well to build sort of the atmosphere and the overall tone of the spooky setting, but the actual scary moments don't feel like there's a whole lot of climax and build up to them, and then it feels like as the reader you move on very quickly from those scary moments, and I don't feel like the pacing is really my style. But if I had to rate it where I am right now, I'd probably be close to a 4-star, 3.75. I don't hate it. I just wanted something a little more terrifying, and I put this down to start The Deep by Nick Cutter, which was way more my pace and what I was in the mood for. I hear a lot of people describe her as cozy sort of comfort horror, which I definitely understand why, because it's not very high stakes, it's not very scary or under your skin. It's very much like, I don't know, watching Supernatural. If you're into the show Supernatural, some moments are scary, but most of the moments are not. They just have a sort of like a dark angle to them, and you can enjoy it without feeling like you'll be scared to go pee by yourself, you know what I mean? So I think I'll come back to Darcy Coates, or I'll probably pick up another one of her books, but I don't know. I hated to DNF it, but I think that I'll come back to it. All right, friends, that is everything that I read in August, including DNFs. I finished a total of 8 books, which I am a very casual sort of reader, and I'm a mood reader, so I tend to read, if I'm like really doing books back to back, I tend to read 1 book a week. That's pretty standard for me. So for me to have gone through 8 books in a month is really pretty fast paced, if I say so myself. So I'm really proud of myself. I really enjoyed recapping these books with you. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these, if you look forward to reading any of these, and if you have recommendations, I will 100% always accept them very welcomely. What am I saying? Anyway, I want your recommendations. That's what I'm saying. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. Hit that like button, it really helps my channel. Hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you always know when I've got spooky things coming to you. Bye, y'all.